Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors China webinar series on what you need to know about investing in the Chinese market. The whole point of this webinar series is that it is really geared to companies that are at a point right now where they're going to be pushing the green light and move forward with establishing an entity in China. And throughout this whole week, we've been looking at some of, or nearly all of the key considerations that a company has to make prior to starting that setup process. So on Monday, we were talking about business scopes, company names. Tuesday, we were talking about registered capital, total investment, budgeting. Yesterday, we were talking about the definition of a registered office address and the importance of that around legal and tax consequences. And today we're going to be talking about not only how to appoint the right people in your China corporate structure, but also who should be the shareholder. And then tomorrow we'll be talking about opening and choosing your corporate bank account. So I am familiar with everybody that is on today because I've seen you pretty much all attended my previous sessions. So I'm going to skip this slide, but just for the YouTube recording, I just want to highlight here that usually I ask the attendees who they are, whether they're a newbie, whether they're a startup, or whether they're an experienced China hand in China. But let's move on quickly. So just technical points once again, so I can reiterate it. If you guys run into issues with your bandwidth or with technical difficulties, please note that if you simply get kicked off the GoToWebinar system, there will be the YouTube recording that will go up on our YouTube channel. I will not be distributing slides during this week's presentations because people have misused my slides recently. And just know, yeah, the recording will be up by later today. In terms of me, if I run into technical issues, bear with me, please. It usually takes about 30 seconds to 1 minute to reboot, and I will be coming on to finish today's presentation. Now, what will probably be the biggest feedback that I get from all of my webinar series is the Q&A. So the more interactive you are with me, the more interesting this webinars become. So please don't be shy, ask questions, ask anything you like. There is no dumb question when we are talking about investing in the Chinese market. Today, I'm going to be talking about shareholdership. I'm going to be talking about appointing people in the Chinese market. There will be certain sections where I ask you guys questions. Again, please interact. I won't switch slides until you guys interact. And hopefully we can finish this webinar within the 60-minute time frame. All right, so please do use this webinar to your advantage. What we will be going through today, so probably something a little bit different, is I'm going to start off today with case studies. Then I'll be talking about shareholdership, and then we will go in detail about corporate management and allocating power, and then ultimately what will be your action plans when you're incorporating. So for the sake of my YouTube channel, who am I? My name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I have 17 years of on-the-ground experience in corporate services and corporate compliance in China. And my focus for those 17 years has been 100% on inbound investment into China, which just simply means that 100% of my clients are foreign investors in the Chinese market. I've helped over 500 companies with their pre-investment advisory. So exactly what we're doing in this webinar series, I do in depth with companies prior to actually incorporation. And then we do everything from just general market entry advisory, market research, all the way through to actual implementation, and then hopefully at some point focusing on growth. I'm also a creator of the China Roadmap Method, which is a methodology that I've created based on my 17 years of experience, and where now I try to put my clients on this roadmap so that we can tick basically all the boxes in terms of key considerations you have to make, developing your ecosystem, getting the data points and research on hand, and making sure that in the implementation stage, all aspects of your business are protected, so that ultimately you can focus on a performing and growth business. So if you want to subscribe to that, I've got my next session November 10th, which is next Tuesday. Please do subscribe to it. It's a great 60 to 90 minute workshop where I actually get you to do activities and sign up for that. You can do that on our website, woodburnglobal.com/events. So we're getting back to the main topic today of setting up a company in China. So this is ultimately your action plan for today, which is figuring out who to appoint for the following roles when you're establishing your entity. The first is who's going to be the shareholder, who's going to be the authorized signatory of that shareholder. Are you going to set up a board of directors, or are you going to have a simple structure with just one executive director? Who will be the legal rep? Who will be the general manager? And who will be the supervisor? All of these roles need to be appointed up front. The documents associated with a shareholder will have to be notarized by the Chinese embassy/consulate in your jurisdiction. So they are critical documents. And that's it. And today I'm going to be explaining what these roles mean. What are the responsibilities? What are the liabilities? And how can I help you to make those decisions on who to appoint? But before I begin, I do want you to interact with me right now. Who has a fear to hold any one of these positions for your China business? If you do have a sense of a fear, type in fear in the chat section of your control panel. I would like to gauge right now, what is your position when setting up this investment? So Julie said fear. Anybody else? Pascal said fear. Jihong said fear. Nathan said fear. Anyone else? Kim, you're on this here today. Kim is a big fan of my webinars, and I know that you probably might even have one of those types of roles in China. Kim, what was your feeling prior to entering the market? Let me know. I know there'll also be some people here from what I've seen in the registration list that are looking at restructuring their existing businesses right now because of acquisitions or mergers. And so they need to understand these profiles as well. But give me your opinions. Do you have a sense of fear? So the majority vote today right now out of the 4 responses has been fear. I hope to calm that fear by the end of today's presentation. All right. So the first chapter for today is who should be the shareholder? And the biggest question that I get asked is, should it be an individual, i.e. the entrepreneur, the leader, the business owner, versus a company? Now, all I'm going to give you today is my opinion, because you can look at this in so many different ways. I would highly recommend you not to choose the individual route. Now, the reason why I say that is because if you choose to become an individual shareholder, i.e. you as a person, you are going to be the shareholder of this China entity. The biggest downside is that if you do become profitable in China, or you are creating profit repatriation strategies in China to get money out, please remember that the money will go to you, your individual bank account, because you are the shareholder. As a result, instead of analyzing the tax liabilities from a corporate perspective, you are analyzing it from an individual income tax perspective, both from the Chinese market and then where the money goes to in that jurisdiction. Okay, so from a tax component, I don't fancy the individual route, but also from a liability perspective. If anything were to go wrong, it falls on your individual shoulders. Okay, so that basically means if you go into bankruptcy, if you get into a situation of your structures had some form of criminal activity, if you have gone through the social credit system and you are subpar in terms of your status, i.e., do you have a good or bad standing status in China regarding your company, that will reflect on you individually as the shareholder. So this is kind of why I say, let's put all of that, let's mitigate all of that risk, let's mitigate all of those taxes, and utilize a company to act as the shareholding entity of that China company. Okay, I hope this makes sense for people. If it doesn't, ask questions and we'll hit on that on the Q&A. So the question is, and that's where I'm leading into, is I'm hoping that people understand my perspective and my opinion, and that they would go more in the direction of utilizing a company. And if you would utilize a company, you've got to understand the difference between utilizing simply a holding company overseas or an actual operational company that is overseas, okay? So there are three issues here. One is the double taxation agreements. Now, whenever you are doing repatriation strategies, developing repatriation strategies or designing repatriation strategies, or even just simply thinking about dividends being repatriated out, the Chinese government is investigating whether that shareholding company has any substance to it. So they will look if that company has commercial or economic substance. And if it has none, because you can't prove otherwise, then you can't benefit from the double taxation agreements. In addition, you have the issue around indirect transfer of assets, as well as the place of effective management of that Chinese company. Okay, so there are issues surrounding all of those three things. Okay, my opinion is the following, because everybody's on a tight budget. All right, COVID has appeared, but just generally speaking, people are on a tight budget. Historically, everyone was using Hong Kong as the holding jurisdiction, as the gateway to their Chinese operations. So I'm using Hong Kong as a case study here, which basically meant that people were setting up a Hong Kong company, not using it for anything, I mean, at all, paying for the maintenance of that Hong Kong company until the day that they became profitable, which is probably 3, 4, 5, if you're lucky, years away. Which means you're maintaining a structure for 3 to 5 years, which is just pure cost out of your pocket. This holding company doesn't just have to be in Hong Kong. It could be in Singapore, it could be in the British Virgin Islands, it could be in the UK, it could be Ireland, it could wherever in the world you want it to be. Usually it's one of these tax havens, right? You just have to make sure that whether that cost that you are going to pay for of having that holding company makes sense right now for the structuring of your business, okay? Now, if you tell me, well, Christina, I'm going to use Hong Kong to act as my regional hub and I'm going to transact through it, fine. Oh my God, that totally changes the advisory that I would give you, okay? But if it's purely for a holding and you're not going to use it for anything else, please don't go to your corporate service provider, because this is what I hate. Don't blame them for you choosing this and blaming them that you've spent so much money on this type of structure when actually you've never really needed it. Okay, because that structural decision should have been made right from the beginning. Now, if you look at double taxation agreements, you will find that a lot of them with China have been updated, that the rates being utilized are very similar to the Hong Kong China DTA, which used to be predominantly the best one. But ultimately, it is no longer like that. I mean, whether you set up using a UK company or a US company, or, you know, depending on the type of US company, or an Irish company, or whatever, British Virgin Islands or Seychelles, you can absolutely, you know, it's the same rates, okay? Now, you just have to keep in mind that utilizing jurisdictions like Seychelles, BVI, Cayman, Isle of Man, Guernsey, Jersey, all of those places are red flags with the tax bureaus in China. So they will probably do more investigation and ask more questions when you are designing your profit repatriation strategies, or even just simply repatriating dividends. Okay, but please do get advice on this, okay, because the shareholder holding structure is something that should be discussed. It should be brainstormed. You should not just be talking to a China advisor. You should be talking to an advisor who's also in your home jurisdiction to really weigh out the pros and cons so that you're optimizing the legal structure, you're protecting the shareholding structure, and you are optimizing your tax. Okay, quite a few considerations that you have to make there. All right, so this picture is really bad. I'm really sorry. Those words say war stories. So I'm going to start off today. So that's all I wanted to say about the shareholding. Really take it into mind. And again, you can always set up a 15-minute call with me and we can go through your options and whatnot and quickly discuss it. But if you do have questions about the shareholding, insert them, okay? Because I'm sure people would love to hear what your thoughts may be. Today, I'm going to start off with war stories because people tend to love the war stories in China about corporate management. So, and some of these you actually will probably blow your mind. All right, the first case study was, and these are all clients of mine, okay? So this, just so you know, I've gone through this myself. So the first case study is about a high turnover of corporate management. So this was an SME in Canada incorporating their company in China. And although they had no control over the situation, they could have organized the corporate management of their Shanghai company a little bit better. And what I mean by that is that they had extremely high turnover in their head office, in the shareholding entity, of C-level positions, which meant that within the first 2 years of operation, they spent over 80,000 renminbi simply changing the corporate management structure of the Chinese company because people kept resigning and nobody wanted to take on the role of those positions in China. Now, I don't know the reasons of the turnover in the head office. All I know is that with the Chinese entity, there was so much change that out of their budget, they spent up to 80,000 renminbi in making those changes within the first 2 years. Obviously, you don't budget for these types of things because you don't expect so much change to occur. When you are appointing people in your corporate management, your thought is that they are solid, stable individuals within your organization that you won't have to change the corporate management in China. In this situation, that did not occur, and they could have actually organized it in a much more simple format. The next case study is termination of individuals that are in the corporate structure. So this was an SME in Italy. They'd been established in China for a number of years. The legal representative, who was also the general manager, was an Italian who relocated in China to manage the subsidiary. And before getting advice, the Italian headquarters decided to terminate his employment, forgetting that he was appointed as the legal rep and the general manager within the government system. So when it came down to replacing this individual in the government system, they had not realized, or it hadn't come to their attention, that the old legal rep needed to sign off on the fact that he had been terminated. He needed to show, you have to show this proof to the government in China, okay? But the legal representative wasn't on hand to sign it. And because the termination was ugly, he refused to sign it. So thinking outside of the box as a corporate service provider, I went to my team and said, you know what, let's try, because we can't find this guy. And probably even if we did, he would refuse to sign anything for this company, or even if he would want to sign something, he'd probably charge an exorbitant amount for it. So let us tell the Administration of Industry and Commerce that he's died. And let's see what happens there. Now, the Administration of Industry and Commerce, in any government office and bureau, they're not dumb. they asked for proof of his death. We needed to provide a death certificate to show actually that he had passed. All right. So when you are appointing people, make sure you've got a backup plan if you are looking or suddenly you need to terminate them. Okay. This is very, very critical, and it will be one of your action plans. Case study number 3 is if you have a team of people in your head office that have a fear of taking on any role associated with China, and as a consequence, you have nobody to replace people with. So this was an SME out of the US who had incorporated their Shanghai subsidiary. They had a legal representative who was the head of Asia Pacific operations based and residing in the US. So it was a logical choice, but he resigned for personal reasons. He found a new job and he wanted to leave the company. So he said to them, and he reminded them, by the way, I am the legal representative. Please remove me. It took the company a year and a half to make that replacement. And you will understand why this is so incredible when you understand the liabilities that are associated with the legal representative, okay? What eventually pushed the company to appoint somebody was the fact that this person who had resigned threatened to sue the company and threatened to take legal action against the company if his role was not going to be removed, if he was not going to be removed from that role in China, okay? And the reason that he took this so seriously was because his new role in his new organization was also head of Asia Pacific, and China was one of his regions. And worst case scenario is that if the old company, so my client, would, I don't know, do something bad, would be criminally corrupt, would go through bankruptcy, he might not be able to enter the country, being that he's the designated legal rep. Okay, so you've also got to take care of your employees, and you've got to have a backup plan in terms of if people are removed from positions, if people resign, who would be the backups to make that replacement, okay? Because in the Chinese government office, those positions cannot remain blank. You need to have people that are appointed within them. So let's look at the corporate management in China, okay? And I've created this org chart to explain it to you. So at the top of the chart, you've got the shareholder. So like I said earlier, that is a critical position you have to appoint. Who is it going to be? Company, person. And then you have to understand if it is going to be a company, who's going to be the authorized signatory to that company? Meaning who's going to represent the shareholder when signing any documents related to China. The difference between the left and the right is when you look at the board of directors or you look at the executive director. So let's start with the diagram, the organogram on the left. For the board of directors, the shareholder is appointing the board of directors, and there has to be a minimum of 3 people or a maximum of 50. You will have then a legal representative who is normally the chairman of the board. And then you will have a general manager. And then alongside that, the shareholder will also appoint a supervisor. And the supervisor cannot be any of those people that are board of directors, legal rep, GM, somebody completely separate. And I'll explain the common sense behind that later on. On the right-hand side, if you don't have a big organization, right, and you just simply don't have the people to create a board of directors, then you will have no choice but to go through the route of executive director, which means it's one person. And ultimately, the executive director can be the legal representative who is then also the general manager. Doesn't have to be, but can be. And then you will have to appoint a second person to act as a supervisor. So in the diagram on the right, where you have the executive director, the shareholder is appointing a minimum of 2 people. One person who fulfills executive director, legal rep, GM, and then a second person who fulfills the role of supervisor. Whereas on the left-hand diagram, you're going to appoint at least four people, 3 people in the board. The chairman will also be the legal rep and the GM, and then you'll have the supervisor who's a separate individual. Okay, so that's the minimum quantities for either side of those organograms. Okay, so the organogram on the right with the executive director is if you've got a small organization, you don't have so many people that are going to be responsible for China. You have a lean management system, whereas on the left-hand side, this would be for larger organizations that want to have a board of directors where you have a multitude of people that are going to be decision makers. So these are the questions you've got to ask yourselves when you're setting up the company. Who's going to be the shareholder? Who is going to be the authorized signatory? Are you going to choose a board of directors or an executive director? And then who are you going to appoint? Who are you going to appoint as legal rep? Who are you going to appoint as general manager? And who are you going to appoint as supervisor? These are the questions you have to answer, okay? So what are the criteria of these individuals? First of all, nobody has to reside in China. Nobody, okay? Logically, you should be appointing people that are responsible for the China business. You should not be picking people at random, okay? It should be people who are knowledgeable and responsible for what is going on in China. For the board of directors, by default, the chairman is the legal representative. However, in many cities, there is legislation stating that this doesn't have to be the case. So meaning that the legal representative could be somebody outside of the board of directors. All right. The chairman of the board can be the legal rep as well as the general manager. On the other diagram, the executive director can be the legal rep who can also be the general manager. And then ultimately, the supervisor cannot be any of those people. It has to be somebody who is completely separate from the board, legal rep, GM, executive director. Okay, cannot be the same individuals. I hope that made sense for everybody in terms of the criteria. Okay. Sorry, just also to emphasize, there is no age limitation on this. There are age limitations on obtaining visas to get into China, but there's no age limitation in terms of appointing these individuals. Okay, so this is really, the next couple of slides, I'm not going to be going through bullet point by bullet point, but what I want to emphasize is what are the responsibilities. So one of the documents that you are, or I will create for you when you're setting up your company is the articles of association that are associated to your company in China. Another term for that would be your Chinese company's bylaws, okay? In these bylaws or in these articles of association, there is a chapter on the corporate management, what the responsibilities are of the corporate management. And on these slides, I have listed here a very, I mean, this is really extensive, you might think, but a very brief outline of what the responsibilities are, which are truly just common sense. So in any company, in any jurisdiction around the world, what is the responsibility of the board or executive director? Well, it's basically the board or the executive director, they have to follow through and execute the resolutions that the shareholder is initiating. They have to come up with the corporate strategy. They have to create the budgets, and they have to basically show all of this to the shareholder to obtain approval and to basically then execute those guidelines, okay? The liabilities of the legal rep. So I'm not even going to go into the responsibilities of the legal rep because most people are concerned more about the liabilities of the legal rep. So the liabilities of the legal representative is that ultimately the limited liability company should be the liable entity but under certain circumstances that are criminally related, the legal representative will also receive penalties and sanctions, okay? And that has anything to do with what I have listed here in terms of knowingly operating an illegal operation in China, knowing or concealing the fact that fraud is occurring, that the entity is not in compliance, secretly withdrawing funds, disposing of property, etc. So any of these types of criminal activities that, quite frankly, these are the same, very similar legislations as it would be anywhere else in the world, okay? Probably you don't have the term legal representative, but there's probably somebody in your structure that has that type of liability if there is criminal activity occurring within the organization. Then you've got the so let me go back a little bit and just highlight what are the responsibilities of the legal representative. So ultimately, the legal representative is the legal face to the entity, okay? So this individual is the one that, once the company is established, usually signs off on all the resolutions that are created for changes that are going to be made in the entity. Okay, so they are approving these types of things. In addition to that, the legal representative is the primary operator of the bank account in China, meaning that it's the legal representative's passport that is shown for the bank account opening process. And I'm going to go into that in tomorrow's episode. So stay tuned for that. So keep that in mind in terms of the responsibilities for the legal rep. In terms of the responsibilities of the general manager, well, the general manager is usually appointed by the shareholder, but can also be appointed by the board of directors or the executive director. Okay, and the general manager is the one who is implementing all of these strategies and handling the day-to-day organization of the company in China. Okay. The responsibilities of the supervisor. So this might be something that you guys aren't familiar with. Supervisory roles came about in about 2005, I believe, 2006, when there was a huge case in Guangdong province, I forget in which city, where there was a Walmart. And this Walmart had a trade union, and it was one of the first protests of a company where workers refused to go to work and they were petitioning outside of the store. And the outcome, basically in brief from this episode, was the fact that a supervisory board should be created in every single company where the trade union representative would be part of that board in order to be able to supervise that the board of directors, legal rep, and general manager are doing things in compliance according to PRC regulations. Okay. Now, in smaller structures where you won't have a board of directors, you'll have an executive director, you can appoint just one supervisor. Okay, and the role of that supervisor, who's appointed by the shareholder, is to report to the shareholder if there's anything that is non-compliant. Okay, so the first item that I've listed here is the supervisor's role is to inspect the financial affairs of the company, because that's usually the biggest area where you'll see the red flag in terms of being either compliant or non-compliant. Okay, they're also there to supervise the duties and execution of the board of directors, director, legal rep, senior, and general manager, as well as any other senior managers. Okay, and they have to report directly to the shareholder if they see any of these actions occurring. Okay, so here comes the fear issue, right? People are worried to take on these roles because ultimately they don't know what could happen to them on an individual basis if they were to travel to China. They also feel that the fear stems from the fact that they cannot control compliance issues within the company. They also feel that they're too far away from China to be able to maintain a transparent knowledge level of the company. And I mean, there's so many other reasons, but these are probably the biggest three that are popping into my head right now in terms of fear factors. In the media, you obviously see the war stories. You see the worst imaginable cases. The latest one that's popping into my mind that was really all over the international news was a US GM who actually got locked up in the factory and was put on lockdown in the factory and could not leave it from the police because of certain activities. And he was also the designated legal rep, and the company was required to go through an investigation to see if those criminal issues were real, whether he was involved in them, whether he was aware of them. So it was a huge legal issue. And I don't remember, quite frankly, the number of days he spent in lockdown in the factory. It was definitely a minimum of a month. But that is really, really a war story, okay? The guy did something wrong. He did something wrong, and he got caught doing it. Another case study I can highlight is a friend of mine. A personal friend of mine, was a vice GM of a factory outside of Shanghai, where the French country head, who was also residing in China, maliciously set up a factory 7 kilometers away from that existing company to compete and basically overpower that company. So this is also something I want to highlight here. Criminal activity doesn't just occur with the Chinese, it also occurs with the foreign investors. Who knew? Okay, there's so much negativity towards Chinese individuals, but nowadays I am seeing, and this is not just nowadays, it's probably in the last 10 years, I've seen more criminal activity occurring by Westerners than by Chinese. No joke, okay? And they just think they'll get away with it, so they do it, all right? So that whole case study is a really long story, but ultimately you've got to create solutions within your organization to mitigate risk. And ultimately, if you are doing frequent health checks, if you are aware or have this feeling that something's not right, get it checked out, do a health check. Ask somebody with a new set of fresh eyes to go in and investigate and do a background check on your organization, okay? In addition to that, create internal guidelines that limit people from doing certain things, okay? It's all about allocating the power. Now, I've also had my own personal experiences with this, okay? And I truly believe that delegating power always requires a degree of trust. If you talk to my father and my brother as to why they appointed me as going into China back in 2003, it was because, and this is what they tell everybody, the only people we trust are family. I trusted my sister, I trusted my daughter, so I sent her over. I didn't trust anybody else. Now, not everybody is in a family organization, but you have to have a certain level of trust within your home jurisdiction, your headquarter, about the people that are working for you, and whether those people then are the right people that you should send over to China. But delegating power requires a degree of trust, and you can always create certain measures to mitigate risks, okay? So some ways to mitigate risk with the legal representative is maybe don't involve that individual in too much of the daily operations, right? Keep the chops separate with a third party versus giving it into the hands of someone you're employing. Give access to your bank account probably only to your CFO at the head office. Use the help of a third party to operate your account. so that certain things are not within your operational organization. You may also want to change up these roles. So the term of validity of these roles is 3 years, and it's stated that in the Articles of Association. It's usually a minimum of 3 years. So you can always change people over in order to mitigate risk, that they don't gain too much power over the Chinese entity. However, you probably will fall in a trap and say, oh, those guys have known what's going on in China for 3 years. Now, if we appoint somebody else, we'll have to start from scratch. So that's always the downside. All right. But ultimately, what you can also do is obtain signed copies of signature sheets, which this Italian client of mine did not do initially, that are undated for security purposes. And this is, again, not just for the legal rep, but anyone in the corporate management, in case of termination, in case of resignation, and to then have a backup plan of who would replace those individuals. Okay, so when you're creating your corporate management structure today for your Chinese structure, in the back of your mind, you should already have a name who might become the replacement. And then have these signature sheets. Now, obviously, and I completely understand this, somebody might say, there's no way I'm going to sign a blank piece of paper. There's no way you're going to ask me to do that. I'm not going to do it. Okay. However, you have to kindly state these pieces of paper are going to be kept by an outside party, either a lawyer or a corporate service provider, and they will be only utilized at XYZ circumstances. And you can even put that in the employment contract. Okay, so that if there is a breach, at least the legal rep or the people in the corporate management structure have some ability to, attack the company in those cases, if that were to occur. But this is a way to avoid any of the war stories that I highlighted earlier, okay? Allocating power to the general manager. Now, this is actually a situation where it stumps people. All right, so probably in your mind, you are thinking the general manager should be the person who is on the ground in China operating my business, which would completely be logical. However, if you're starting up your business in China, you might not have a general manager from day one. You might have the skill set individuals, i.e. the engineers, the technical people, the marketeers. You might not have this senior role set up because you're thinking, actually, we can maintain that from our home jurisdiction and save costs, right? Nobody is telling you that this GM has to be someone who is residing in China. In addition to that, nothing is stopping you from being this GM in your home jurisdiction, in your headquarter, and then appointing an actual GM who on his name card says GM. I don't know if that last point made sense to you, but when you are appointing these individuals for this corporate management structure, the only place you'll find out that information is with the Administration of Industry and Commerce. It's in the government systems. It's not something you're going to be marketing. It's not like you're going to have this individual with a name card that says legal representative, general manager, blah, 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 blah. Hey, guys, my title is head of business advisory. It gives you no indication as to whether I'm in the corporate management structure of Woodburn, right? So you don't need to market who is in that government system. So it can be a very strategic decision as to who you will appoint in your head office. And you can actually have a real GM who probably you've just hired sitting in China. His business card says general manager, but he's not appointed the general manager in the government system. Okay? In addition to all of that, in terms of allocating the power to the GM, again, restrict the use of the company chops. You might want to have limitations not only in the Articles of Association, but also in the employment contract. And then ultimately, questions you need to ask about the physical operational side of your business is, will the general manager have access to the bank account? okay? Allocating the power to use company chops or seals. I use the word company chops, guys. Okay, what are company chops? So when you establish your company in China, you will be issued with chops. A company is bound whenever a contract or other document is affixed with a chop, with a seal, okay? And that can be employment contracts, lease agreements, supplier contracts, customer contracts, third-party service provider contracts, etc. Okay. What makes all of this dangerous is that in China, it is not a signature that makes a contract official. It is the company chop that makes it official. It's what binds the contract. Okay. And there is obviously a risk of forged chops, but nowadays it is quite easy to detect forged chops. There are certain things that you can kind of see if chops are being forged. All right. So these are the types of chops that are issued. Okay. In total, there are 6. Depending on your type of business, you might not even have those 6. Okay. In my company, I have 4. I have 4 chops. I don't trade, so I don't have the customs chop, and I didn't order the contract chop because we just use the company chop as the main chop. Okay. So a customs chop will be utilized if you are doing import and export business. Okay, so you have the company chop. This is utilized. You have either the company chop or contract chop. You can simplify it and just use the company chop, and that's going to be used on all contracts. The finance chop is utilized at the bank for everything that is done in person. The invoice chop is for your fapiaos. The customs chop is for customs declarations. And the legal representative chop is utilized as a signatory to your banking operations. Okay. 1 set of these chops is issued per company, and it is recorded with the Public Security Bureau, with the Administration of Industry and Commerce, and with your bank when you do the bank account opening. With the bank account opening, it's not all the chops that are registered, it's the company, finance, and legal rep. Okay. Oh, and an invoice, sorry, an invoice. So these chops are critical for your operation. Now, one story I can tell you is when a US client of mine, they had a representative office in China. This was really back in the day. And they fired the chief representative, who was an American Chinese individual, over the phone. So they didn't even get legal assistance. They didn't even have a labor lawyer go to that meeting to terminate him. They had nobody to take away the licenses and chops of the company. And the guy lost face. He was totally shocked by the termination. He was not happy with how it was done, the compensation that was owed, and as a consequence, to retaliate, he refused to give back the chops and the licenses associated with the representative office, which meant that the representative office could not function, could not do anything in relation to the bank, that the company basically had to let that rep office go because they couldn't even go through renewal processes unless they decided to take legal action against that individual, which they decided not to do because they thought that would be more expensive than actually just letting it go and setting up in a brand new city, so not that same city, a brand new city, a new representative office. That was their cost calculation. Okay, so, you know, tricky stuff going on. So this is your action plan. I have a series of questions to ask you about the actual operational side of your business that I hope will allow you to understand who you should be appointing for certain roles. Okay? So the first question is, who or what is making the investment into China? Is it a company or an individual? Who is the company decision maker? Oh, sorry, who is the China company decision maker? Who is going to be running that? Who's going to be responsible for that? Who will be the China CFO or finance manager? Where are they residing? When you're operating the bank account, who will be the bank signatories? Who is going to approve payments? Who is going to have access to the online banking? Who is going to be responsible to submit original documentation to the bank on a monthly basis or for specific transactions? Who will keep control of the company chops? Now, for a lot of these things, you can outsource it. Please don't forget that. If you don't feel like you have the right individuals to appoint for these roles, don't forget you always have an outsourcing solution, okay? So these are the 5 questions that I want to ask you. Now, in terms of fear, what I want to tell you is this. For 17 years, I have been in the corporate management structure, always. And I've never had an issue where I've been scared because of the rules that I've had, that I wouldn't be able to enter China. And the reason why I have had no fear, yes, one of them was the fact that I was on the ground in China and I knew what was going on, okay? But when I was on holiday, and there are, because I've got 2 kids now, there are certain, summers I don't spend in China. I will probably be for the school holidays, most of the school holidays outside of China. I have created internal operational guidelines to mitigate any risk of somebody doing something against the company, any internal employee. Okay. I travel with the company shop wherever I go, whether that's for a business trip or a holiday. That company shop never leaves my side. It is constantly in my handbag. The bank tokens, so that I have access to my account, is with me with the company shop, always by my side, so that I have access to that account. Okay. You need to find individuals that will take this level of responsibility. Okay. And sometimes it's not easy. All right. But if they are in charge of the China business, you do have to give a certain level of trust. And just know, first of all, you can change people. All right. You just have to have the replacements. So people can be changed. It's a bureaucratic procedure to change someone, but it can be changed. If you have a feeling that somebody is doing something under the table, speak to a labor lawyer up front before you take any form of action, because the labor lawyer will want to review the employment contract, and they will want to review any operational guidelines that are fitting that individual to see if there has been true breach of contract and whether you have the real proof to be able to terminate or do something with them. Okay? You want to have a labor lawyer on your side for any senior managerial roles where the people are residing in China. Okay, you want to have that support. Okay, I wish I would have had that support early on myself for people that I had hired. So you definitely want to have that support on your side when you get into critical situations, because you may even find that you're using that labor lawyer to help you to terminate certain roles. Okay. You can create operational guidelines where you get your company checked on an annual basis to make sure that it's basically doing an accounting and tax compliance review as well as a legal review to make sure that everything is in compliance, that your company is ultimately in good standing. Okay. You can also look at your social credit system number. Are you in the positive or are you in the negative? That might even be the first thing you look at. Okay. So there's a lot of things that you can review to understand the status and the transparency. But ultimately, what I want to tell you is there are millions of foreigners who've taken on these types of roles as GM, as legal rep, as executive director, as part of the board of directors, and absolutely nothing has happened to them. Okay, what you see in the media or stories that you hear it's truly because someone has performed an illegal activity on the ground in China, and therefore it has come to light in the media. All right. And to avoid those illegal activities, those companies didn't have control practices in place, right? So you've got to have these compliance procedures implemented. So guys, that's the end of today's presentation, but before we start the Q&A, and there are some questions that have popped in. Fabulous. Let me know what your takeaways have been. What have your takeaways been from today? Please type that in and let me know. Julie says keep the chops safe, as well as the licenses, Julie. So here I've been emphasizing a lot on the chops, but I do want to also highlight that your business license and any other certificates that you obtain during the incorporation phase should also be kept safe with the chops, okay? Or you split those out. Some people do that as well. Just to highlight on the keep the chops safe, for example, with one client of mine, I actually keep the finance chop because we do the operations with the bank. And so the finance chop is separated from the local GM. Pascal saying the idea of having a GM who is actually not the registered GM in the government's register. Yes, a good little tip there for you all. Keep these coming because it always helps me to know what your takeaways are and that you've kind of understood the information. So how can I help you? Well, basically, again, it's all about networking, right? Networking, building your ecosystem, and having an idea also of who you might want to appoint to handle certain licenses, chops, how you might want to separate that. And then all of the remaining services, again, that I've highlighted on the previous presentations, but I do want to highlight two. One is that at Woodburn, we do offer the service where I can become a supervisor of my clients' companies. But that then requires that I also do the accounting of those companies in order to be able to fulfill my duty as a supervisor to look at the financial status of the organization and understand whether they're in compliance. You will not find so many individuals, and I'm referencing lawyers, who will take the legal rep role. Because whether you're a corporate service individual or whether you're a lawyer in China, you are not handling the day-to-day business of that company, right? So it's not like you know the insides and outs of that business. I'm willing to take on the supervisory role because the main function is to look at the financial aspects of the organization, which is usually the first red flag to see if the company is a non-compliance. When you're outsourcing the accounting work, something that's very interesting, and I'll give you my perspective on it, is that if employees are unwilling to give you documentation or they can't even give you documentation, that's already a sign of weak communication and something's up, okay? And that you can, that's part of my role as a supervisor, is to look at that type of communication. So that is one, is the supervisory role. And the other is also acting as custodian of chops and of licenses. So we also hold that role, and we keep, as a tip for an operational guideline, you guys should think about having logbooks as to how chops are being utilized, when they're being utilized, as well as the licenses. Okay, so these are all, again, the types of services that we can offer in relation to the corporate management and remaining in compliance. If you guys want to set up a 15-minute chat about this, please don't hesitate to reach out. There have been a bunch of new people that have joined since the start of the presentation, so I don't know if some of you are new or not, but I'm going to add these into the chat section right now in case. Hold on, I'm going to have to move this screen up so I can see the link. Bear with me, everyone. There we go. This is the link to my diary, so if you want to set up a call. Alternatively, WeChat. Fantastic way to communicate. Add me on WeChat. I have a China Roadmap community that I've set up. A couple of you are already on there. It is a community where, unfortunately, I'm doing most of the posting lately. I wish people would be a little bit more interactive. but it's a way for you all to network with each other. You know, if you guys would need help building your ecosystem or getting, you know, contact with someone, well, that's the whole point of the community, is to kind of, you know, give you, from my perspective, give you guys updates on China legislations and regulations, but also to network with other people that are in the community. And I'm building up on that right now. And then we're going to start the Q&A. So, I'm going to read out what Kim wrote, because Kim is somebody who's been, like I said, he joins a lot of my webinars. And for me, he's an experienced China hand that's always looking to gain new information. And he's been operating in China for quite some time. And I really like what he wrote. It's going to be a little bit long, but I think it's fantastic to get somebody else's opinion besides mine. So Kim wrote, fear is a primary motivator to stay out of trouble in China. The onus and the repercussions on foreigners as an individual shareholder of a Chinese company is quite heavy. Any foreigner looking to put their name up as a primary shareholder is encouraged to seek first legal and tax advice to avoid the repercussions. And if anything goes wrong, especially if one does not read Chinese and you put the financial management of your company in someone else's hand. I love that, Kim. Well done. Thank you for highlighting that. Kim said also he loved case study number 3. He said it was a great example. Nathan is saying, can you change this, Christina, as the company evolves, or will this cause issues? Nathan, my assumption is you're referring to the corporate management, but I just want to highlight this also regarding the shareholder. So you can change anything over time or as the company evolves. So for example, if you think today that you're going to invest directly from the UK, absolutely fine. If you find out in 5 years' time that actually you do need a Hong Kong company because you're planning to expand in the Asian market and you want China to be under that umbrella, you can change the shareholdership of that Chinese entity. What you need to be aware of anytime you change the shareholdership is the fact that you need to have an equity transfer agreement, right? So if you are planning to make any changes in the shareholdership, my biggest tip in order to make the process as easy as possible is to make sure you are not profitable yet in China, okay? Because then you can avoid capital gains taxes, okay? So try and do those changes before you are becoming profitable in China. Julie had a question. The supervisor would need knowledge if PRC regulations, so should be local Chinese person rather than an expat, or is that not necessary? It is absolutely not necessary. The supervisor, in many instances, the supervisor of many of my clients is actually the CFO in the head office. Okay, because the CFO should be the one consolidating the accounts and should be getting an understanding and should be getting the management reports every month and should be understanding if there's any red flags. So the CFO in the head office can hold that role as well. And obviously, if you have then a lawyer in your ecosystem or a corporate service provider in your ecosystem who can just substantiate any warning signs or red flags that the CFO might have, then that's where you will get the knowledge from. Next question. Jihong is asking, does financial officer has to be in China, residing in China? No, no, the CFO does not have to be residing in China, but you do need to have an accountant registered with your company who meets with your tax officer, is registered with your tax officer for doing the tax filings and the tax declarations, and is familiar with PRC accounting standards. But that does not have to be the CFO. It just should be an accountant who knows all of that information. All right, guys, that's all that's popped in. If I have missed something, can you guys add that in? I'm just going to keep going with the slides, but please don't hesitate if you still have more questions, because I will be staying on the line. Again, you know, no strings attached. Set up a call with me if you want to discuss. And then get ready. We've got one more day to go. So tomorrow, we're going to be talking about how to open your corporate bank account in China. I will also be highlighting how to choose your bank in China. So not just regarding the opening of the accounts, but also how you're going to evaluate what bank is the right bank for you. So if you haven't registered for that, please do so. You can go to woodburnglobal.com/events to register. And then don't forget, join us on this WeChat China Roadmap community. It is the whole purpose of why I've set it up is actually for people to network. And if they need anything, to voice that so that not just me in the community, maybe somebody else in the community can help them. So I am going to end the recording there. I will stay on for another 5 minutes or so. So if people have more questions, they can type that in. And otherwise, I want to wish everyone a great Thursday and see you tomorrow. Take care and goodbye.